RNA polymerase is a protein. Okay? To transcribe DNA to RNA and the way to make proteins, you need this protein. So what came first? This to do that, or that to do this? I'm lost. I can't get out of that conundrum. It's the chicken and the egg. Well, you see, I need the chicken to lay the egg, but the egg has to actually get the chicken. Gotta go grab a beer. Okay? So that was a problem, right? And then DNA, of course, from one cell to the next, has to be able to replicate itself and make copies for the future generations. That's done by DNA polymerase, another protein enzyme. So I can't pass DNA to the future unless I have this protein, but I can't have this protein unless it does this. So what evolved first? The pathway or the, I don't know. Well, Keck gave us a way out. Because these ribozymes, they have enzymatic activity. They're not as versatile as proteins, because they're not as complex in terms of structures, but they can act like catalysts, and they can self-replicate too. So probably RNA was the precursor of the DNA world of today. They talk about the early RNA world, where it could function both as a storage molecule of inheritance to carry a recipe that could replicate for future cells, and it could also catalyze formation of proteins. Okay? And then later, DNA, the storage capacity of the genetic information was replaced, RNA was replaced by DNA, because DNA is a lot more stable. Keep DNA dark and cold, it will last for thousands of years. RNA, it breaks down. So it's so hard to work in laboratory with RNA. It's so labile. Okay? I think I told you the oldest DNA extracted from a fossil, they could actually sequence and recover information was from a 700,000-year-old horse fossil that recovered intact DNA. RNA will last about an hour and a half, and you're going to have to look for it. Kind of interesting close to chapter 6, okay? All right, let's move on to the first part of chapter 7. And our lab on Thursday has to do with chapter 7 on aerobic respiration. Okay, chapter 7. Aerobic respiration. Now, we talk about respiration at the cellular level. We want to make sure we distinguish respiration from this. A lot of people confuse the two. This is a really ventilation of my lungs with air to help O2 to diffuse into my blood. Aerobic respiration really is at the cellular level, converting the stored energy of the food we eat into ATP, summarized by this equation. So this is a little bit different, okay? And it's much more complex than the overview represented by the summary equation. But I want to back up for a second here before we go into the details of that chemistry. Let's talk about how really powering life, whether you're an autotroph or heterotroph, really the foundation of powering life is electron transport chains. Okay? That use the flow of electrons in a membrane from one protein complex to another to generate a gradient of protons across one side of the membrane, like water behind a dam, build potential energy, And then when that water is allowed to flow through the spillway to spin a turbine, when these protons cross from where they're concentrated to the other side, remember, so it's a diffusion of protons. And again, the protons, they generate an electrical chemical gradient. There's a chemical gradient because they're concentrated on one side relative to the other, water behind the dam. It's an electrical gradient because they're charged, right? Protons are, right, okay, positive charges, so we have, and usually this side of the membrane is like, is relatively negatively charged compared to this, so there's a force, a electrical chemical force that wants these protons to move from this side of the membrane to this side, what we call a proton motor force. Okay? And this gradient is established by either, in photosynthesis, by energy from sunlight. Okay? Sunlight energizes electrons. The kinetic energy of sunlight energizes an electron. That electron flows through an electron transport chain in a membrane. Okay? As it flows from one member of this transport chain to another, okay, down in a free energy gradient, okay? And again, second law guarantees that electrons are going to flow from a large amount of free energy to a less amount, sort of like an exergonic reaction guaranteed to happen. These electrons will flow through this membrane sort of energetically downhill. As they flow, that energy release is converted to a proton gradient, this electrical chemical gradient. And if these protons are given a pathway through, okay, that kinetic energy can be converted to ATP. Whether the gradient is established by sunlight energy, sunlight powering the electrons to flow through the membrane to build this gradient, or whether the gradient is established by energy from food. Okay? All types of cell energies are based on electron transport chains to establish these gradients, whether it's looking at energy derived from sunlight photosynthesis, or energy from food in a process called oxidative phosphorylation, part of cell respiration. So the electron transport chain is kind of the key foundation of energetics in cells. These electrons, again, flow energetically downhill. That energy is used in part to build this gradient. It also produces heat. Okay? And we'll see in some circumstances that when electrons flow through these membranes, sometimes the establishment of the gradient is uncoupled, and the electrons flow just create friction heat as a way to just produce heat for the animal. Okay? There's a certain type of fat found in hibernating mammals and infants called brown fat. I'll talk more about that later, where the electron transport chain allows electrons to flow energetically downhill, but that flow of electrons is not used to establish a proton gradient that can be used to produce ATP. It just, the flow of electrons just makes friction heat to make body heat. Okay? That's in a special type of fat, called brown fat. You find in infants, infant humans, and hibernating mammals, for example. Okay? So this is so electron transport chains are at the foundation of energetics of cells. Whether the energy of the electrons to flow downhill energetically comes from sunlight energy or from the high energy bonds of food. And where we start today in chapter 7, we look at this process here. They're extracting energy from food. This is the food, usually represented by a 6-carbon sugar. These are high energy non-polar bonds. When the bonds are broken, the electrons will flow energetically downhill toward an electron acceptor. This is the electron acceptor right here. As those electrons flow downhill, they release energy. Okay, and if you can control this reaction, you can harvest this energy to make ATP. This is an uncontrolled reaction. We call this combustion. And the energy is all lost as light and heat. Okay, so the reaction for aerobic respiration in the cell, which is a controlled combustion reaction, is really the same equation for what happens in a campfire. Okay, where this is an uncontrolled combustion, uncontrolled burn, or anything like that. But if you can control that energy, you can use that energy, essentially capturing the energy of the food to an electron transport chain that builds this gradient, and then these protons, if they flow through the right enzyme, they can generate ATP synthesis. So this is where we start in chapter 7. We look at, well, that's photosynthesis is actually this part of the figure here. We start with the high energy fuel generated by plants and other photosynthetic creatures, mostly plants for us animals, and we extract the energy in cellular respiration, producing these low energy products. And in this controlled burn, we use the energy to convert ADP and inorganic phosphate into ATP, usable energy. Okay. Again, this is based on an electron transport chain here that harvests the energy of the combustion to ultimately build this ATP. The production of these fuels, which is chapter 8, takes low energy substrates from the environment and using sunlight energy, again, sunlight is captured by pigments. That energy is sort of converted into an electron flow of electrons through a transport chain, okay, which are then used to build high energy sugars, okay, converting kinetic into potential energy. Okay, again, both these require utilizing electron transport chains as the foundation of cell energetics. And we can't overemphasize the importance of the oxygen revolution in the history of the Earth. Because it enabled the evolution of aerobic respiration. Before there was oxygen, this, of course, chemistry couldn't have happened. Here's a timeline of Earth here on the x-axis. 4.6 billion years ago, near the beginning of the formation of the Earth and solar system. Here we are today. Here's the present day. The y-axis is O2 levels in the atmosphere. You can see for more than half the history's planet, the planet of our history, there was no detectable oxygen in the atmosphere. Then there was a period of rapid O2 accumulation.